Okay, let's get started with the discussion of the day. ISO 27001 versus CMMC. Both are cybersecurity standards, but their format and delivery are quite different. So, what we learned today, the difference between the two standards, a short uh, list of steps to business certification, and then we'll talk about professional certification. We'll talk about the career benefits of professional certification to the standards. So let's start off with a little bit of history. ISO 27001 actually goes back to the 1990s, which, that surprised me. But as usual, it started in the United Kingdom. Almost all ISO standards, management system standards, begin in the United Kingdom. So in 1990, they recognized that there was an increased risk with computers and networking, and they decided, okay, we need a standard for uh, information security. In 2005, the standard by the UK was being used widely worldwide. So the ISO organization adapted it, and they released the first ISO 27001 version in 2005, and it's used globally for all industries. CMMC, different history. As you well know, there's a lot of concern about theft of intellectual property by foreign countries, by foreign individuals, worry about breaches involving defense contractors. And back in the early 2000s, there was concern about it, but there wasn't a whole lot done about it until 2017 when the government passed a bill that all defense subcontractors had to do a self-assessment to NIST 171. So you wonder, okay, well, what prompted this uh, order to be issued? And actually, it was the fact that the Chinese had stolen enough of the F-35 intellectual property that they were able to design their own fighter that is almost identical. Different changes, but certainly identical. So the government says, okay, well, we're going to do this self-attestment thing, and they issued with their federal acquisition requirements that all companies had to do a self-assessment against NIST SP 800-71, which was a set of 110 security controls designed to protect classified, uncontrolled information. So the key word here is uncontrolled. If it's controlled classified information, this is not going to do it. So just remember that this whole standard, everything was designed with the idea to protect the intellectual property of all of the companies serving the defense industry. So what happened after the self-attestment was mandated? They discovered that the F-35 was hacked. Had decided, well, the self-attestment is not working. So the problem with it was there was inconsistency in doing assessments, because when you think about it, 85% of manufacturers in the United States are under 100 employees. They're small. They don't always have the people or the knowledge to be able to really understand what those controls mean. In fact, there are a lot of people in the IT industry that don't understand it either. So the assessments were inconsistent. There was no accountability. Companies would attest to doing assessments, and all they did was look at it and go, yeah, yeah, okay. There was a growing risk, as we discussed. So recognizing that this is a problem and that they needed a more structured, enforceable, and tiered cybersecurity framework, the DoD contacted Carnegie Mellon. They already were familiar with Carnegie Mellon through the CMMI standard that's used for software development, and they asked them to create a multi-level maturity model certification to cover the cybersecurity controls. So let's look at the standards themselves. ISO 27001 is a management system, whereas CMMC is based on NIST, and it's a list of requirements for compliance to protect CUI. So you're wondering, okay, well, which standard should I implement? Well, you could implement one or both, but the really bottom line, the question is, are you mandated? If you have Department of Defense contracts, you are. Or is it voluntary? Or you may have specific requirements for cybersecurity controls from a customer for ISO 27001. Or you may decide, I'm thinking about doing defense contracting. I think I'm going to put in the NIST system. Either way, the key difference is ISO 27001 is voluntary. It's not mandated by the government. When I say government, I talk about Department of Defense. Next question is your company a subcontractor to a prime contractor for the Department of Defense? If so, the answer is you have to implement CMMC and become certified. Now, if your company is a global entity and you operate in the United States, 27,001 is a solution for all companies worldwide. If you operate all over the world, it's the best standard. I absolutely like the standard because it's very organized and it is a management system. It also works for all industries. Now, let's say you have a corporate headquarters in the United States, but you have operations outside of the country that are actually creating product or services for the Department of Defense, then you will be required to be certified to CMMC. So let's just kind of do a brief comparison of the two. ISO 27001 is based on the PDCA model for ISO standards. That's Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's a closed loop system, and it is a management system. In other words, it's designed to protect and improve all of your implementation of your controls. It uses a risk-based approach. There's 14 security control clauses, of which there's 35 categories. The categories are grouped in four main categories, and this is the part I like about 27,001 is because they have grouped the subject matter, or as they say in CMMC, the domains, into four main categories. So there's organizational controls, people controls, physical controls, and technological controls. This makes it a total business management system for controlling information security. CMMC is based on NIST SP 800-171, and it's a typical kind of a spreadsheet approach. There are 110 controls, 14 domains, and then within the controls is 320 assessment objectives. So you ask me, well, what does that mean? What that means is, let's say you have a control that says you have to implement access control for CUI data. And underneath that access control, there are 6 assessment objectives. They would be like identify the users, identify the devices that are storing the information, um, identify what type of information has to be protected. So there are 6, in some cases, 6 assessment objectives, sometimes more. So this makes the self-assessment of NIST SP 800-171 very, very, I'm going to say labor intensive if you don't understand what the objectives are. Fortunately, they do have in the CMMC assessment guide, they do explain what the things mean, how examples of how you can apply it. Same thing with 27,001. There is a guide, 27,002, that explains the implementation of all of the controls. Okay, so you figured out which standard you have to implement. And so let's talk about next steps. So how do I get started? Well, if you're looking to implement 27,001, and this is from the point of view if you're an employee working for a company that wants to implement 27,001, of course, the very first thing you have to do is buy the standard. So you buy both the ISO 27,001 and 27,002 standards, and you can get them from the ANSI web store. You identify somebody in your organization, and if you're that person, then you have to be very, very familiar with all of the all the interactions of your company, not just information technology, but the entire company, from the time that you get contact with the client to information being shared that has to be protected. The next thing is to take a course on how to implement the standard. So we have 2 different courses that are available: the ISO 27001 Lead Auditor or ISO 27001 Implementer. Now, the difference between the two is that the implementer goes into depth on how to implement the various controls and requirements. Whereas the lead auditor, there is an understanding that you already know what the implementation requirements are, and it is teaching you how to verify compliance to ISO 27001. Both of those courses are available by self-study, or you can get e-learning, which is actually a self-study, but with a video of somebody training, doing the training. Or you can actually join a workshop or instructor-led course. Once you have your training and you understand what the requirements are, then you begin the implementation. And that typically takes six to 10 months, depending on how well you understand everything, because it's like anything, you're learning a new language. CMMC same issue is you need to download the requirements, but those requirements come from the U.S. Department of Defense. They are free. You need to verify what DFARS you have. Are you required to do level one, which is just a self-assessment, and um, implementing 17 of the requirements, or are you level two and you have to implement everything and go for certification? Also, if you are the member of the IT department, then you need to be very familiar of the flow of information and how the various functions of your company interact, like HR, information technology, purchasing, how all of these interact with one another. If they are touching CUI at all, you have to make sure that the controls are um, taking care of all of them. So after you have decided who's going to be implementing this standard, then you take the course on how to implement it. There are many course providers in the Cyber AB marketplace. That's CYBER hyphen AB.org. And the marketplace has a list of all the organizations that are providing training. Once you've had the training, then it's time to do the self-assessment. If you're a small company, then I would encourage that whoever is you've outsourced your IT services to, that they do this with you, because it's going to be extremely important that they are in this journey at the same time. Okay, so let's talk about why you would want to get training on 27001 or CMMC. Right now, let's say you just graduated from college in computer science. That degree is not going to get you anywhere. Basically, you're going to need to have knowledge of ISO 27001. There are 9,000 jobs, as of May this year, on the recruiting cloud applications for either knowledge of 27001 or experience. 9,000. Common job titles, and if you look at it, these are all industries: finance, healthcare, technology, government. We'll talk government, it could be city, it could be state, it could be federal. The titles: 27001 lead auditor. This person would be responsible for planning and conducting the audits to ensure compliance to 27001. Or you might work as a lead auditor for a certification body. Information security consultant would be somebody that is helping companies implement the standard. Compliance manager would be the person that's overseeing all of the regulatory requirements and internal policies, and it usually takes more experience. And then the IT security auditor is a very specialized audit position, and basically it focuses on the IT systems and the processes to ensure that the vulnerabilities are covered and that compliance is met. Other titles: risk manager, governance, risk, and compliance analyst. You'll see this more in the UK, starting to be coming up in the US, but the EU is definitely more focused on governance, risk, and compliance. And of course, the big job, Chief Information Security Officer, that is the individual that's got every single certification you can imagine and really has the experience to be able to lead an organization to plan this strategic plans and programs to implement and comply to information security requirements. Salary expectations, if you're doing the lead auditor training, you don't necessarily have any defense experience, so you decide, okay, I don't want to do that. Um, the salaries are typically 50,000 to 75,000 a year if you're employed by a certification body. So, but if you are what we call a 1099, um, you're just working part time. The ability to make more than this is there. The average lead auditor right now makes $800 a day. Mid level, 75,000 to 100. Senior level, 120 to 200. Now the guys that are up here at the senior level, the, these are the managers, the individuals that are driving the strategies and driving the compliance. Okay, so now let's go CMMC. I was very surprised to see that there were 800 jobs posted for certified CMMC professional and certified CMMC assessor. But then when I thought about it, is everybody, the subcontractors right now, if they're not already doing it, they should be doing it, are preparing for certification. And in order to do that, they have to implement the controls in the CMMC assessment guide and NIST 800 So, what will these CCPs and CCAs be used for? The beginning, for doing assessments, for helping document system security plans, for doing readiness assessments for companies to make sure they're ready. They could be doing documentation. So at this point, right now, there's 800 jobs out there, and the requirement has not been released yet. So everyone's preparing, but they expect that by the middle of this year, or well, we're already there, at the end of this year, it will have been released as a requirement. Salaries for CMMC assessors. This is kind of a skewed number because right now there are not many CMMC assessors, so it's all supply and demand. There's a high demand and a limited supply. A lot of assessors right now work by the hour, so salaries are usually lower if you're employed. But as a certified professional and you are implementing systems as a consultant, you could be making $100 to $200 an hour. And then as a CCA, same thing, 125 to 250. But these are all jobs that are you're not doing 40 hours a week. But if you are a person that wants the freedom to do what you want to do with your time, and what a way to make some good money, this is the way to go. The lead certified CMMCSer makes a lot more because they manage the assessment. They plan, they facilitate, they work with the client, and they do the final report. So there's a lot more responsibility on them. And the highest that I've heard so far is $300 an hour. Okay, so let's look at industry demand. The demand for both for knowledge or certification to both standards is growing rapidly because of the threats, cybersecurity threats are growing. So if you are interested in exploring specific job opportunities or you need guidance on preparing for such roles, check out www.cyberseek.org, and they have all the openings by the states, by the roles, what certifications you need. And then when you decide you need specific certifications, give us a call because CPI Sys training provides All of the cybersecurity certifications provided by CompTIA, ISACA, ISC squared, and the ISO standards with PECB. Okay, so with that in mind, let's take questions and answers.